Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. One of the things that the unique perspective of shamanic practitioner, former engineer gives me is a really passionate desire for a very elegant solution to high quality of life and holistic quality of life. So I'm really interested in good physical health in a way that is kind to us emotionally, in ways that we can have sustainability around money, but also the experiences that make our soul feel like it was really worth it. If we were at the end of our incarnation being like, yeah, that was a good life. I'm really, really glad I signed on for that, even with all the crazy, hard, complicated stuff, everything that went into that. I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I had that experience. So one of the things that I think is really useful before we start applying manifestation magic and calling in the things we want and using the combination, like I feel like when it comes to what we want in life, ideally we're approaching it with a combination of our magic and our human effort. And we have our resourcefulness and our intuition kind of in the territory between those things. And in the modern world, there's so much opportunity to write our own ticket, to really curate our life. I sometimes feel really charmed and blessed by the amount of beauty I have in my house and how efficient it is to order something on Amazon when I need a particular tool or something that would move the dial on having my life be really aligned and really supportive. There's, of course, problems with, addictive online shopping and the vulnerability of that, but there's also a real elegance of being able to quietly pick the thing that you feel like would really serve and support you, and then have the freedom to go on about whatever you're up to. But amid so many choices, there's actually some scientific research that says having more choices can actually decrease our happiness or decrease our satisfaction. It's an interesting kind of thing. I think a lot of it has to do with some of the old hunter-gatherer biology that we still reckon with, that wants us to get it right, to make the right choice. Because so much was life and death, and making the right choice was really important. And it's nice to take the benevolence of the modern era and know that we can choose and we can learn from the choice and we can choose again. I like the notion of research and development in our lives. We try something, we have an experience, it's good to implement zero trial learning on certain things. They're heavy duty drugs. You might want to, look around at other people's results and decide that maybe trying heroin isn't something that you need to, personally explore whether it's right for you. But for a lot of things, we have this ability to take a job and find out it doesn't work for us, or embark on a career and then choose again. And it's very common and normal for people to do that. Now, there are some people who have the stick it with itness, amount, set way too low, and some people have it set way too high. So a nice middle place for that dial, I think, is important and valuable, as with so many things. But one of the things that's super helpful in getting the most out of life is the more clarity about what you're pursuing. Because if we leave it up to our instincts are going to lead us to invest an enormous amount of resources and energy in things that don't actually move the dial on our happiness. And if you want to geek out on this in way more detail, there's a Corsica, The Science of Well-Being, which is a course from Yale, which I think is just a magnificent manual of what science tells us about happiness, so you can start to know when something just feels so true, but there's a really good chance your brain is lying to you when it says, absolutely huge amounts of wealth would, make you so much happier, when in fact there's a very specific place where there's no correlation between more money and more happiness. And there's definitely a place where more money does equate to more happiness. Absolutely. Poverty is hard and stressful, and alleviating that is really helpful. But after a certain point, it isn't going to make you appreciably happier, but the kind of level you might need to be at or how hard you might work. Now, if you're just innately into the creating of something and it just makes your heart sing, you might continue to create for the sake of creating, and money might incidentally follow because it's fun to build businesses or create new products or have side hustles, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like the minimal amount of effort that isn't fulfilling, that we'd rather not be applying, that we aren't inspired by, that isn't tied to something that will really make us happier, the better. The more that we thrive in the world, the more bandwidth we have for doing other things. And the modern world has such abundance. I've been refining my travel dreams, and there's so many places I would love to go. And I also really like being at home. So I'm not someone who wants to do the digital nomad thing. I like having a home base and my bed and all my crystals around me. And I really thrive with travel. But as a result, there's just a certain amount of all these shiny places of power on the planet that have beauty and rich energy and something amazing for me. Which one do I pick in this season? And we always end up leaving really good offers on the table. And that can be true of people. There can be invitations to events and experiences and time with people that we really like. I remember one of the sweeter things someone said about his wife, when she had insomnia was, it was hard because, getting to interact with her in the middle of the night, he adored her. He really enjoyed her, but he also really needed the sleep, and the tension between that charming enticement of getting to have time with his wife. And they were, entrepreneurs with a really intense business with a bunch of employees. So their couple time was limited, but sleep is also, really, really super important. So sometimes we leave really good offers on the table of invitations. I was really flattered with, somebody suggested seeing if they could hire me to do some writing for them because they thought I was a really good writer, and I really would have loved to connect more with the people. I like their vision. I could see where I could do a great job. I was super flattered to be asked, and the person kind of floated it with, I think Katie's pretty busy. And that was just the truth of it. I didn't consider it for a moment, charming as the offer was, because, I'm really engaged and full with what I'm actually up to. And so given that, it's really good to have a lot of clarity about what we're really longing for. And there are just different layers to this. And I think it's really important because sometimes our brains will fix on something somewhat unattainable as the thing that we're longing for. And there are many other paths. So delving into what the thing would provide. Like, one of the questions I want to invite you to muse on, you might journal on it, you might, entertain it listening to music while you're driving, you might take it with you on a mini Vision Quest walk where you just keep being with the question, seeing what bubbles. But it's, if I could have it all my way, then this is what it would look like. This is a question that Alison Armstrong uses in the context of helping couples negotiate win-win deals, and I like it in that context, but I also like it in a broader life context. And this isn't magical thinking. This isn't like, oh, I would win the lottery. You can go through the process with that if it's really loud for you, but it's really that kind of thing, like the money thing, where it's like, what is the number where more money than this probably wouldn't provide appreciably more happiness? So one of the areas that I feel really happy about is I really like the vehicles I have. They're very reliable. They're in good condition. They're older vehicles. When I travel, they rent me new vehicles. I am really clear that I wouldn't be appreciably happier with a brand new car, which is awesome because there's a lot of resources that would go into wanting and longing to upgrade my car. And I might do it and I might not, but there could be the the energy leak of wanting something that wasn't aligned with all the other life choices I'm making. And so I find it really lovely. And the thing that I do want is I would like to have a backup camera. So I have it on my mental list of like, when there's some extra income for each of the vehicles, I'd love to put in a panel like that would talk to my iPhone and, that kind of thing and show me a backup camera. And, that could be a chunk of change, but it's not anywhere near a new car. And there's nothing about the cars I have. I have a four-wheel drive for playing in the desert, and I have a, Hyundai Elantra passenger car. And those genuinely make me happy. There's nothing other than a mild, not extreme longing for a backup camera. So that's great, and when I look at the home that I have, it's nice not to feel like a bigger home or, more expensive this or that. When I travel, I have an enormous amount of clarity about what really provides the most support. So if there's either a bathtub or a hot tub, that really makes an appreciable difference. But there are other, kind of upgrades that I don't care about as much. I pay a lot of attention to the environment. I'd rather be in a cabin in the woods that, is more attainable. So I have a lot of things that I'm factoring in, and I will pay extra money for things that move the dial, but I have a lot of clarity about that. And one of the things that can happen in our lives is if we're doing a lot of adapting to what circumstances, we may get out of touch with, what we would really choose if we could choose from a clean slate. And so when our lives have more financial freedom or more time freedom or more job opportunities, we don't ask those questions in those deep ways. I have a whole livelihood program and class that I really loved creating that's really about all the different factors that would make a job really work for you and be sustainable. And some people think, oh, if it's work that I love and a cause I'm passionate about, that would work out. And I've also worked with a lot of clients who worked for nonprofits who were paid to do something they were passionate about, and the group dynamics really sucked. They were awful, and they got really burnt out, and it wasn't fun at all in the long run. And so knowing if you've done a lot of adapting, you may not be as clear, like, what time would I start my day if it was up to me? What's my peak time of day when I would do the most complicated work? When do I really want to go to bed? How much time do I want with other humans? How much time would I prefer with this particular human? The sort of care and feeding manual. And again, I love that we have this adaptability. And so I think it's wonderful that we can be like, yeah, it's not my favorite, but it is what it is. And I'm not going to leak energy arguing with reality. I think that's a valuable skill. But I think it's nice to pair that with not losing the clarity of what we really, really long for. And if you're kind of hammering your head against something that you're like, I really want this thing, I really want this thing, and it's not something that's particularly attainable or responsible or aligned, when we're making a decision about a car or a vacation or, how we spend our time, ideally we want to have feedback from all the chakras so that we aren't pursuing, the romantic relationship because we have a soul connection and love them so much with somebody who's an addict or who's a compulsive liar. Those things aren't going to go well, even with this enormous, compelling other part. I was musing recently about a, very short duration, very unfortunate relationship that I engaged in. It was somebody who pursued me hard and then dropped me hard, and I think he did me some real favors with that approach, because so much mental illness and so much chaos and so much story ever changing, and those aren't normally things that I would put up with, but the flavor of affinity and connection and attraction and his intelligence and that rapport that we got into when we got into it was really, really appealing. And I was thinking like, oh, that's a really specific flavor of what I like about connection in a romantic context when it's working well, and kind of having this wistful longing, but fortunately able to see that it was just a really particular feeling that I was wishing for, rather than the person with all of the, ups and downs and highs and lows and unreliability that came with that. And so if you are longing for the new car, or the this or the that, and there's some other part of you that says, I would pay a price in a lot of other things that matter to me if I really pursued this. It's super random, but there was a man I knew who basically had a plan of renting a, super expensive car, a different one every year, because then he could have the midlife crisis sports car. But he was smart enough to know that we have this hedonistic adaptation. So how happy driving a sports car would make him wasn't going to be something that lasted long term. And for some people, having that car, I'm not knocking having the car you really want, because there's some people who it just makes them happy, happy, happy. It is a wonderful thing for them. And it can be the, expensive muscle car and they adore it, or whatever it is. So it's not to say that that couldn't be the thing that you just are so delighted with. I would have a hard time explaining to a non-crystal enthusiast how this, amethyst cathedral that weighs more than I do just delights me. And I still stand in front of it just in awe of the beauty, and let the energy wash over me, and, just turn the lights on and look at it. It's, it's something that really, really, really pleases me. And it was one of my, higher amount of money investments. And it was very, very aligned, because it gives me an enormous amount of, joy and pleasure in a way that a fancy car just wouldn't. So it's not to say like fancy cars are bad, but this particular man knew that for him, it was like an experience, and then he would be less present with it and it wouldn't fulfill. And then he got to drive all the really cool cars and all the brand new ones, and it worked really well for him. And it was much more manageable to have a car rental for a week or two. Having this experience is something that he wove into his life. I think about certain kinds of views where you're like, oh, the house on the lake. I don't feel like I want a house on a lake forever necessarily, but wow, if I could have one for a week with an Airbnb. I recently went to Arkansas to dig for crystals, and one of the things I loved was it was really affordable to have this beautiful Airbnb looking over a lake at a very reasonable price point. And I loved getting to have that experience. But if I lived there, I would get used to it. I have beautiful views where I am, and I'm used to them. So the aliveness of having it for a shorter duration. So the next point, once you've defined, if you could have it all your way, what is it that you would have? And again, not magical thinking, but like really, really pragmatically, this would move the dial on my happiness and satisfaction and ease. And having the map of that, I think is really great, because there are ways we limit our possibilities when actually we could go into work and, renegotiate, like, hey, I want to go, slightly less hours because our money is good enough to do that, or I want to work from home. I love how much the impossibility of working from home got opened up with COVID, and suddenly they're like, oh yeah, I guess there's a lot of availability for this, something that was absolutely non-negotiable, not a possibility. And so the creativity, once you know what you want, there may be things that feel impossible that actually there is a way. And then there's also another concept that I really like to pair with this, which is the concept of enough. And our instincts never have an enough button. So this is part of why adults need to limit how much ice cream children can have. I had an experience as a child. I went to visit my grandmother, who I absolutely adored, who did not have the, parental experience of, regulating things. So she told me I could have whatever size of ice cream I wanted. I just had to eat it. And I had way too much peppermint ice cream because I hadn't had that permission before. And I didn't have the body awareness. It was a step up in body awareness of, how things would feel. But for young kids, they're just more and more and more and more and more. And we have a lot of more sophisticated brain function that can work with that more and more and more. But I think it's just useful to know that there's a part of us that's always kind of a bottomless pit. The instincts just don't have an enough switch. There's not enough status, money, safety, freedom, all of these kind of things. And so it gets in the way. They're just always seeking, 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 which, if you were a hunter-gatherer person, always seeking more food as a default to your lifestyle was totally sound for survival for you and the tribe. Always on the lookout for what else could help us survive. What would be good for us. But for all the complexity of modern life and all the problems we still have to solve, we've organized ourselves in ways that we don't have to always be seeking food and shelter and safety. We have a lot more spaciousness to get up to other things. And so there's a lot more freedom and choice when you're not committed to pursuing a result if you're legitimately happy at a different level. So if you were to go through that, sort of process, if I could have it all my way, this is what it would look like. This is how much time I would be at home. Here's how much time I would be traveling. Here's how much money I would need to support the lifestyle that would, really work for me. Here are the longings of things that would make me happier that I just don't have the resources to justify it at this moment. Those kind of questions, like what would it be if I could have it all my way? And then for the things that maybe feel really unattainable, digging a little deeper into, well, what is it that I'm really longing for? Like I had this enormous longing to take a cruise because it's this combination of new experiences with being really cared for and having this cocoon of a, cabin by myself. I do cruises alone. Sometimes I go with other people, but they have to be in other rooms. But I took a solo cruise to Alaska when it was just opening back up, and I got an incredible price on it. And I adored it because I had this sort of safety and security and ease of unpacking once combined with these new experiences. I was going out and meeting new land, and it really worked for me. And so I was having a longing for that. And I went, well, I'm kind of tired and depleted, so I don't have as much energy for like an epic big road trip for something. But I want that sense of peace, but also stimulation. I like the idea of that kind of, away from the world. But there isn't really a convenient cruise to jump on right at this moment. So how could I give myself this peace and longing and the right amount of stimulation while being at home in my beautiful house that's filled with crystals? Those are good questions to ask if something's really unattainable. Like what is it that is underneath this longing? So a next question, a follow-on question that really gets at that is if I had the thing all my way, what would that provide? What would that give me? Who would I get to be? What would I get to experience? What would that unlock about the experience of being me if I could have this thing? And that's a really great question because it'll really help you zero in on something and see if it's really high value enough to get creative and imaginative and start asking smart people like, hey, I really have this dream. What do you think? How could this happen? And there are options to really dynamically move our lives, to change careers, to change where we live, to, get involved in different things. There's a lot of choice that our brain kind of hides from us because, there's our hunter-gatherer brain think it's really risky to, do something where, we have a proven track record of not dying with the thing that we've been up to. And, moving into other spaces feels kind of alarming. There's a tension, between risk-taking and, and playing it safe that we need the both and of those things. It's a good balance. And at different times in our life, the balance is skewed differently. So teenagers get a lot more rewards for risk-taking behavior. And as you get older, you get more deterrent for hurting yourself, whereas a young teen might not care so much if they injure themselves. And then from there, that point of what is enough, what is enough money? What is enough sleep? What is enough connection to other people? What is enough travel? What is enough vehicle? Where having more than that might make you happier, but the ratio of energy and effort and complexity to reward, in corporate America, they talk a lot about return on investment. My dad tells a funny story. He says, getting his MBA was really helpful because then he had the vocabulary, and he was in a meeting where someone said, I haven't seen an ROI statement. He says, that's because there is no I, it's just R, it's just return. We don't really have to spend any money to make this thing happen. It's an awesome deal. But it gave him this kind of level of confidence to stand in his, really creative thinking at Hewlett Packard that saved the company millions and millions of dollars, in its heyday when he was working there. He had a really good time in his career. So that concept, though, of return on investment, I think is really useful and valuable because the enough place will get us out of perfectionism, of getting, we don't really have to have everything all our way every minute of every day in order to be really happy and fulfilled, but we need enough of it our way, and noticing where it's really costing us when we don't have it our way for too long. And, sometimes we're trading off needs. We're like, I could get much needed sleep or I could get much needed social connection. And I'm really in deficit for both because I've been on a deadline at work, and, we might give up sleep to connect, and we might give up connecting for sleep or rest or downtime, the notion of that invitation to a wonderful evening out when you were planning on having a wonderful, peaceful evening at home. You could choose either way. There's no right or wrong, but that sense of running your life generally at enough of the downtime you need and the stimulus you need and the connection you need and the connection to spirit or source or time for introspection or being seen and heard and known. It's really problematic as adults when we're a bottomless pit, when we can never get filled up. There's that kind of addiction behavior. I've worked with clients who had a partner that was cheating on them, and the person just didn't seem to have enough button for attention from the opposite sex in this case, of like there just wasn't enough. So they were always seeking more. And that was problematic in a marriage with a monogamy commitment attached to it. So if there's something that's a bottomless pit where there's just no amount you could get that would make you satisfied, that's something that is really good to look at for, where do I need some healing? Because that's probably an early wound that gets in the way. One of the great things about my nephew is, he gets things that he wants and he's satisfied. He has that experience of satisfaction, whereas my little ADHD, niece, doesn't really dwell in satisfaction. It's like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And there's more complexity with that. So ideally as an adult, if you are dealing with ADHD, you have, really functional ways of managing it and working with it. And if it makes you a bottomless pit of, I need more, you may want to get some support around that, or anything that just doesn't have an enough button, that you just can't be satisfied no matter how much you get. But once you've kind of dealt with that level of healing, that clarity just really sets you up to be elegant in your life. It really sets you up to make decisions quickly and easily because you can decide about the trade-offs. You can have a lot of clarity. You don't do a lot of second guessing. It's a really effective way to keep yourself at baseline. I have a whole podcast on, when we get below baseline and we're recovering, things are a lot more complicated. Whereas if we have sustainability, things are working, we have enough health, enough money, enough relationship success, enough fulfillment, there isn't going to be as many pendulum swings where we create a lot of havoc in one area of our lives because we're so hungry for a need in another area of our lives. we may still do that, but those pendulum swings are really expensive. So a lot of these questions and this clarity really lays the groundwork for being able to be really, really elegant in our lives and really efficient, and have the amount of effort that we put into something pay really huge dividends. And I just think that's a really powerful way to move through the world. And if you're someone who's doing a lot of adapting, like some of my clients, have raised children who have gotten older, and, there's a lot of stuff that just needs to go the baby's way. The baby needs to be fed when it's hungry and changed when it's wet and cuddled when it's crying. And science will tell us babies that don't get as enough of those things, it messes with their brain in a really bad way. And so as a mother, you may be doing it all the baby's way and hopefully, figuring out how to, not have too much sleep deficit along the way, which is super complicated. But when the child's older or even out of the house, the rewiring of saying, okay, now I could have it all my way, you can end up with a lifestyle of over adapting. The job that you had to take that was awful, as a young person without skills. Like I bagged groceries in 100-degree heat back in the day when you took people's groceries out to the car when I was 16. Hated that job, really, really hated it. It was horrible for someone as energetically sensitive and introverted as I was to just be having all of those interactions. I was shy, I was socially awkward. So the overhead of that job, beyond the tediousness of, bagging up groceries and pushing carts out in 100-degree heat and putting them in the car, but like I probably could have played Tetris, with groceries without too much grief if they'd like put me in the back, but that wasn't where they put me. I was, out in the middle of this. And so we do adapt. It was like, these are the rules. This is how you clock in. This is, you show up on time, no excuses. There was a very do it our way or go away. And I've come in the fullness of time to having a practice where I'm like, this is what works for me. This is the system. And not a lot of problems saying to someone, like if they just can't use the internet to purchase something online, being like, well, I'm so sorry. I'd love to work with you, but this is the system I have. And I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of my time trying to create something different. We just aren't a match, and that's okay. But I have this, here's what works for me that really sets me up to deliver the best quality of shamanic work at the most affordable price point and really create strong win-wins. And so I have a lot of clarity about where I adapt and where I don't. And so as we go through life, you may need to revisit, you may be in a different season of life where adapting to what others want isn't as necessary. And even if it is, I think it's really valuable and important to first have the moment where you say, if I could have it all my way, it would look like this. And I'm still adapting to this other thing that isn't all my way, because it sets you up to pay back the bank when it is up to you. If I could have it all my way, I would sleep in today. But I have a work commitment and I'm going to show up for that. But then we at least know that once we have some time freedom, making up the rest could be really, really important before we get really sick because we've overtaxed our immune system. Sometimes we get really sick even when we're making lots of really good choices. But I think just because you feel like it's not an option, ignoring what would really work best for you, even when you can't respond to it immediately, takes us out of dialogue with ourselves. And so when it is up to us, we don't use that choice as effectively or elegantly. And there are prices on the other side and in a lot of different ways. So anyway, to summarize, I hope you'll spend some time with the question, if I could have it all my way, this is what my life would look like. And you don't even have to be right about it. It's just sort of a hypothesis that ideally you move your life closer to that and you test out. And then you're like, nope, actually, this really didn't provide satisfaction, or I got filled up, or I've had that life experience and I don't really need that anymore as much. And then asking yourself what it would provide. If I had this thing, what do I imagine the effects would be? And it's great to write those down, because then you can, see if your mind's making up a crazy story or if it kind of holds water. Like, yeah, I really think, given everything I know about myself, that absolutely would produce this result. And then determining what the enough button is, like where is it enough? And if you've been in deficit for an important need, there may be a desire to swing the pendulum really strongly and have really a lot of something. And that's just something to be aware of, that kind of if you know, didn't have enough time with your partner, you were married to someone in the military and they were deployed and you longed and longed and longed for them. And then they came back and they were, you know, on leave and it was wonderful for the first week and a half. And then you're like, I kind of wish you would like leave the house for like the next 6 hours so I could have some unstimulated time, you know? So being available to gather the research and the data and keep updating those pictures, I think is a really, really useful thing as well. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.